My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 81 years old. People in my town used to call me the quiet woman with a kind smile. They said I was lucky. They said I had a good husband, a peaceful home, and a life many women prayed for. But no one knew the truth. No one knew that the night my marriage died did not happen in a courtroom or a hospital. It happened in my own bedroom. In the room where I once dreamed of babies that never came. I was born in a small farming town in Iowa. I grew up with dust on my shoes and hope in my heart. I married Harold Whitmore when I was 23. He was tall, charming, and ambitious. He promised me a future filled with laughter and children. For years I believed him. But the children never came. Doctors whispered words that felt like knives. Infertility. Complications. No chance. At first, Harold held my hands and told me it was not my fault. He said love was enough. He said we would grow old together. But love can change when silence replaces laughter. As the years passed, Harold became distant. He stopped touching my hands. He stopped looking at me when I spoke. He started spending more time with his friends, especially his closest friend, Victor Hale. Victor was everything Harold wanted to be. Loud, confident, reckless. I never trusted Victor. His eyes always lingered too long. His voice always carried something dangerous. But Harold trusted him. Or pretended to. One night when I was 73, everything changed. It was late. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your heart feel heavy. I was in my bedroom, reading an old photo album. Pictures of birthdays that never happened. Cribs that were never built. Dreams that died quietly. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I thought it was Harold. But when the door opened, it was Victor. He did not knock. He stood there like he owned the room. I felt a chill run through my body. I asked him what he was doing in my room. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a polite smile. A smile that made my stomach turn. He said Harold told him to come. At first I thought I misheard him. I laughed nervously and told him to leave. But Victor stepped closer. He said something that froze my blood. He said Harold was tired of waiting for miracles. He said Harold wanted a child, no matter how it happened. I felt like the walls were closing in. I walked past him and went to the hallway. I called Harold's name. Harold came out of the living room slowly, like he had been expecting this moment. His face was not angry. His face was not surprised. His face was empty. I asked him if what Victor said was true. Harold looked at the floor. For a long time no one spoke. Then Harold said words that still echo in my mind even today. He said, "Eleanor, you know I want a family. You know we tried everything. Victor is my friend. He can help us. Help us." That was the word he used. In that moment I realized something terrifying. The man I loved for 50 years was no longer my husband. He had turned my pain into permission. Victor stepped closer again. I felt my heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I wanted to scream. But something inside me stopped screaming and started waking up. I looked at Harold and saw a stranger. I looked at Victor and saw danger. I walked back into my bedroom slowly. Not because I was weak, but because I was thinking. Because I was planning. Because in that moment, I understood something that would change everything. They thought I was powerless. They thought age had made me fragile. They thought silence meant obedience. They were wrong. Before I closed the door behind me, I turned and looked at Harold one last time. His eyes avoided mine. Victor's footsteps followed me into the room. And as the door shut, I made a decision that would shock everyone who ever knew me. But what happened next was something no one in that house was ready for. Before we continue, let me speak to you directly. If you love emotional and powerful stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Like this video so more people can find it. Turn on the notification button so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know which part of the country is listening to Eleanor's story. Because what I did after that door closed was not what Harold or Victor expected. and the consequences of that night would follow them for the rest of their lives. Victor stood in my bedroom like he belonged there. The lamp beside my bed cast a soft yellow light, but the air felt cold. I could hear the ticking of the old clock on my dresser. Each second sounded louder than the last, like it was counting down to something terrible. He closed the door behind him slowly. I did not move. Inside me, fear and anger were fighting for control. But something else was rising too. Something I had not felt in many years. Clarity. Victor spoke softly, as if he were trying not to wake the house. He said Harold told him everything. He said Harold was tired of watching me cry every time another doctor said no. He said Harold was tired of pretending he did not want children. I stared at Victor without blinking. I asked him one question. Did Harold really send you here? Victor did not answer immediately. He walked closer to the bed and sat on the chair near the window. He crossed his legs like a man who felt comfortable in another person's home. He said Harold did not want to talk about it directly. He said Harold believed this was the only way to save the marriage. Save the marriage. I almost laughed. For years, I had blamed myself for our childless home. I cooked Harold's favorite meals. I listened when he complained about work. I smiled when his friends joked about his empty house. I carried the shame quietly so he would not have to. And now, in my own bedroom, his friend was telling me that my body had become a problem that needed a solution. Victor leaned forward. He said, Eleanor, you are a good woman. Harold deserves happiness. You deserve peace. Sometimes sacrifices must be made. Sacrifices. That word hit me harder than any insult. I felt something break inside me, but I did not cry. Instead, I stood up slowly. My knees trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. I told Victor to leave my room. He smiled again, that same dangerous smile. He said you should talk to Harold again. He said Harold is waiting outside. I walked to the door and opened it. Harold was standing in the hallway, his arms crossed, his face pale. I looked at him and asked him directly, "Did you send him here?" For a moment, Harold did not speak. His lips moved slightly, as if he wanted to say something else. Then he nodded. That nod was louder than any scream. In that moment, 50 years of memories collapsed inside my chest. I remembered the day he proposed to me under the oak tree behind my parents' farm. I remembered the way he carried me across the threshold of our first home. I remembered the nights we prayed together for a child. All of it felt like a lie. Asked him why. Harold said he was tired. He said he loved me, but he could not live his life without a legacy. He said Victor agreed to help us quietly, without anyone knowing. He kept saying us, as if I were part of this plan. I felt my hands shaking, but my voice was steady. I told Harold that what he was asking was not help. It was betrayal. Harold looked away again. Victor stepped out of the bedroom and stood beside him, like they were partners in a business deal. Victor said no one has to know. He said people do worse things every day. He said this is just a practical solution. I realized something terrifying then. They were not joking. They were not testing me. They had already decided my fate without asking me. For a few seconds, the hallway felt like a courtroom where I was being judged for a crime I did not commit. I looked at both of them and felt a strange calm wash over me. I told them I needed time to think. Victor frowned slightly. Harold looked relieved. I told them I would talk in the morning. Harold nodded quickly, as if he were grateful I did not start shouting. Victor gave me one last look before walking back to the living room. Harold followed him. The house became quiet again. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. For the first time in decades, I was not thinking like a frightened wife. I was thinking like a woman who had finally seen the truth. I walked to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer. Inside it was a small wooden box that Harold had never cared about. Inside that box were documents, letters, and secrets I had kept for years. Secrets Harold never bothered to ask about. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the box slowly. As I looked at what was inside, I felt a quiet smile touch my lips. Because Harold and Victor had no idea who I really was anymore. And they had no idea what I was capable of doing next. That night, while they slept peacefully in the living room, believing I was a weak old woman who would eventually agree, I made a decision that would change the direction of all our lives. By morning, everything they believed about me would begin to crumble. And the first move of my plan would shock Harold more than he could ever imagine. But he would not see it coming. I sat on the edge of my bed long after the house went silent. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows like a quiet witness. Inside, my hands rested on the small wooden box that had followed me through decades of marriage, silence, and sacrifice. Harold never asked what was inside it. He never cared enough to notice that I had a life beyond his expectations. Slowly I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was an old photograph. It was a picture of me in my 20s, standing beside a modest building with a faded sign that read Whitmore and Lane Legal Services. Most people in our town believed Harold built his career alone. They believed he carried the family on his shoulders while I stayed home, cooking and waiting for a child that never came. That was not the full story. Before I married Harold, I had dreams. Big ones. I studied business administration in a small college in Nebraska. I was quiet, but I was not foolish. I understood numbers, contracts, and investments. When Harold and I got married, he was struggling. He had ideas but no money, no connections, and no discipline. I helped him build everything. But I did it quietly. Because in those days, a woman was expected to stand behind her husband, not beside him. Inside the box were contracts Harold never read carefully. Papers he signed without asking questions because he trusted me. Letters from lawyers. Copies of bank records. Investment portfolios with my name on them. For years, while Harold focused on his reputation and friendships, I focused on something else. Security. I had learned early that love without safety is dangerous. So I built my own safety in silence. I picked up one document and read it slowly. It was a property deed. Harold believed our house belonged to him. But legally it belonged to me. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and strength. Sadness because I had hoped I would never need these papers. Strength because I finally understood that I was not as powerless as Harold believed. I heard a faint sound in the hallway. A step. My heart skipped. I closed the box quickly and listened. The footsteps stopped near my door. For a moment I thought Victor had come back. But then I heard Harold's voice. He was whispering on the phone. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. He said, "Eleanor will agree eventually. She always does. She has no one else." Those words felt like ice in my veins. No one else. He truly believed I was alone. He truly believed I had nowhere to go and nothing to stand on. I sat back down on my bed and stared at the closed box in my lap. In that moment, I realized something that changed my fear into determination. If Harold believed I had no one else, then he would never see my strength coming. And sometimes, being underestimated is the most powerful weapon a woman can have. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. I washed my face slowly, looking at my reflection in the mirror. Wrinkles lined my skin, but my eyes were sharp. For years, I had looked at myself as a woman who failed to give her husband children. That morning I saw something different. I saw a woman who had survived 50 years of quiet heartbreak and was finally ready to speak. When I walked into the kitchen, Harold was already awake. He was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, pretending to read the newspaper. Victor was gone. For a moment, Harold avoided my eyes. Then he cleared his throat and asked if I slept well. I nodded calmly. He looked relieved. He thought my silence meant acceptance. He thought I was going to agree to his plan. I sat across from him and folded my hands on the table. I told him I had thought about what he said the night before. Harold leaned forward slightly. He asked me what I decided. I looked at him carefully, studying his face like a stranger. I told him I needed time to understand everything. I told him I wanted to talk to a lawyer about our future, just to feel safe. The word lawyer made Harold tense. He forced a smile and said there was no need for that. He said we were family, not enemies. I smiled back gently. Inside I was already planning. That afternoon, while Harold went out to meet Victor, I drove my old car to the edge of town. There was a small law office there, run by a woman named Marissa Lane. She was the daughter of my old friend. She had helped me quietly over the years without Harold ever knowing. When I walked into her office, she looked surprised. She asked me if everything was okay. I sat down slowly and told her the truth for the first time. As I spoke, her face changed from surprise to anger. When I finished, she leaned forward and said something that made my heart pound. She said, "Eleanor, what your husband tried to do is not just betrayal. It is something much worse. And if you are ready, we can make sure he never treats you like this again." I felt my hands tighten around my purse. For the first time, I was not afraid of Harold anymore. I was afraid of what I was about to become. Because I knew that once I took the next step, there would be no turning back. And Harold had no idea that the quiet woman he married was about to rewrite the rules of his life. But the real shock was still ahead. Because that evening when I returned home, I found something in my bedroom that made my blood run cold. Something that proved Harold and Victor had already gone further than I imagined. And I realized that my plan would have to be faster, smarter, and far more dangerous than I originally thought. When I opened my bedroom door that evening, I felt it before I saw it. Something was wrong. The air in the room felt different, like someone had been there recently. My curtains were slightly open, even though I always closed them before leaving. The lamp on my dresser was tilted to the side. For a moment I stood still, listening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Harold's car was not in the driveway. He and Victor were still out. I stepped inside slowly. My eyes moved across the room, searching for anything out of place. Then I saw it. My wooden box was on the bed. Open. My heart stopped. I walked closer, my steps slow and careful, like I was walking toward something dangerous. The lid was lifted. The papers inside were not arranged the way I left them. Some documents were missing. Someone had searched through my secrets. I felt a cold wave rise from my stomach to my chest. Harold. He had never shown interest in that box before. He always thought it was full of old letters and sentimental memories. But now he had opened it. I picked up the papers with trembling hands. I counted them quietly. The property deed was gone. So were 2 bank statements and a letter from Marissa. For a moment I felt dizzy. If Harold had seen those documents, he would realize something he had never considered before. That I was not as dependent on him as he believed. That I had prepared for years without telling him. I sat on the bed and pressed my palms together, trying to calm my breathing. I knew Harold well. If he had discovered even part of the truth, he would not stay silent. He would feel threatened. And when Harold felt threatened, he became someone I barely recognized. I walked to the mirror and looked at my reflection. My face looked pale, but my eyes were burning with something stronger than fear. I whispered to myself that this was not the end. This was the beginning. That night, Harold came home late. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. When he walked in, he tried to act normal, but his movements were stiff. He asked me how my day went. I told him it was quiet. He nodded and sat down across from me. For a few seconds we watched each other in silence. Then Harold spoke carefully. He asked me if I had gone out that afternoon. Said yes. He asked where I went. I looked at him calmly and said I went for a drive. He did not look convinced. His eyes studied my face like he was searching for something. Then he asked another question. He asked me about the wooden box. My heart jumped, but my face remained calm. I asked him what he meant. He said he accidentally knocked it over while cleaning the bedroom. Cleaning. Harold had never cleaned anything in our house for 50 years. I knew he was lying. But I also knew that if I showed fear, he would push further. So I smiled gently and told him it was just old papers and memories. He nodded slowly. But I could see something new in his eyes. Suspicion. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed listening to Harold's breathing beside me. For decades, his presence had been my comfort. Now it felt like a warning. Around midnight, I heard him move quietly. He got out of bed slowly, trying not to wake me. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I heard him walk toward the hallway. After a few minutes, I heard whispers. He was on the phone again. This time I listened more carefully. He said she is hiding something. I saw documents. I do not know what they mean yet. Then he said we need to act fast before she does anything. My fingers tightened under the blanket. Fast. Those words echoed in my mind long after he ended the call and returned to bed. In that moment I realized something frightening. Harold was no longer just betraying me emotionally. He was preparing for something. And I had no idea how far he was willing to go. The next morning, I woke up with a decision already made. If Harold was planning to move, I could not stay still anymore. I called Marissa before Harold woke up. I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other side of the phone. Then Marissa spoke firmly. She said, "Eleanor, you are not safe if he has seen those documents. You need to protect yourself legally and physically." Her words made my chest tighten. Physically. I had never thought of Harold as someone who could hurt me beyond words. But the man who stood in the hallway that night and allowed his friend to cross a line was not the Harold I married. He was someone else. That afternoon I packed a small bag quietly. I did not tell Harold. I told him I was going to visit an old friend in the next town. He smiled and said I should enjoy myself. But his eyes followed me as I walked out of the house. I drove to Marissa's office instead. When I arrived, she was waiting for me. She locked the door behind us and sat across from me with a serious expression. She placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the documents Harold had taken from my box. My heart skipped. I asked her how she got them. She looked at me and said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Eleanor, your husband came to my office this morning." For a moment I could not breathe. I asked her why. She said he wanted to know what rights you have. She said he wanted to know what you could legally do to him. She said he was not asking as a worried husband. He was asking like a man preparing for a battle. I felt my hands tremble on the table. For the first time, I understood that this was no longer just a family conflict. It was a quiet war inside my own marriage. And Harold had already chosen his side. Marissa leaned forward and said something that changed everything. She said, "Eleanor, if you do not act now, Harold might try to control your assets, your decisions, and even your freedom." Her words echoed in my mind. Freedom. I had spent 50 years sacrificing my freedom for love. I was not ready to lose it now. As I walked out of Marissa's office that evening, the sky was turning dark. The world looked the same, but I felt different inside. I knew that the next step I took would decide the rest of my life. But what I did not know was that Harold had already made his next move. And that move would hurt deeper than anything he had done before. Because when I returned home that night, I found something waiting for me on the dining table. Something that proved Harold was no longer pretending. And when I read it, my knees almost gave way beneath me. When I pushed the front door open that night, the house felt heavier than usual. The lights in the living room were on, but Harold was nowhere in sight. I stepped inside slowly and closed the door behind me. That was when I saw it. On the dining table, placed neatly at the center like a message, was a thick envelope. My name was written on it in Harold's handwriting. Eleanor Whitmore. For a moment I just stood there staring at it. I felt the same fear I used to feel when doctors called us into their offices years ago. The kind of fear that tells you something important has already changed forever. I walked toward the table slowly. My fingers hovered above the envelope before I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I opened it carefully. Inside were several documents. The first page had a bold title at the top. Notice of Mental Evaluation and Guardianship Petition. My breath stopped. I read the words again, slowly, hoping I had misunderstood them. But the meaning did not change. Harold had filed a petition to have me declared mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. He was asking the court to place my finances, my property, and my decisions under his control. For a moment the room spun. I held on to the edge of the table to steady myself. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to keep reading. The papers claimed I was confused, forgetful, unstable, and unable to make sound decisions. They listed incidents that never happened. They twisted small moments of tiredness into proof of madness. They described me like a stranger, like a woman who did not exist. I felt tears rise in my eyes, but they did not fall. Not yet. I had spent too many years crying quietly. This time something else filled my chest. Rage. Not loud rage. Not screaming rage. The kind of rage that makes a person calm, focused, and unstoppable. I dropped the papers slowly onto the table and sat down in the chair beside it. So this was Harold's plan. If he could not control my body, he would control my mind in the eyes of the law. If he could not make me agree, he would make the world believe I was incapable of disagreeing. I thought of Victor. I thought of their whispers in the hallway. We need to act fast before she does anything. Now I understood what that meant. They were trying to erase me while I was still alive. For a long time I sat there in silence. I listened to the ticking clock on the wall. Each second felt like a heartbeat of war. Finally, I stood up and gathered the papers into my hands. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the bed again. I opened the wooden box and placed the papers inside it. Then I reached for my phone. My fingers hesitated for a moment before dialing Marissa's number. When she answered, I did not cry. I did not shout. I spoke quietly. I told her Harold had filed for guardianship. There was a sharp silence on the other side of the line. Then Marissa said something that surprised me. She said, "Eleanor, I was afraid of this." Her voice was calm, but I could hear urgency beneath it. She said, "This is serious, but it is not the end." She said, "If Harold wants a legal battle, we will give him one." Her words did not scare me. They strengthened me. After the call ended, I walked to the mirror again. I looked at myself for a long time. I saw an old woman with silver hair and tired eyes. But behind those eyes, I saw something Harold had never noticed. Intelligence, patience, and a will that had survived too much to be broken now. That night, Harold came into the bedroom quietly. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me. For a moment, he looked almost gentle. He asked me if I had seen the papers. I nodded slowly. He sighed and rubbed his hands together. He said, "Eleanor, I did not want it to come to this." I looked at him without speaking. He said he was worried about me. He said I had changed. He said he feared I was being influenced by people who did not understand our marriage. People like Marissa. He said he was only trying to protect me. Protect me. I almost laughed again. I asked him one simple question. I asked him if he truly believed I was losing my mind. For a second, Harold hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He did not believe it. He just needed the world to believe it. I told him I understood his concerns. I told him I would cooperate with the evaluation. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He thought he had won. He thought I was giving up. He did not know that my cooperation was not surrender. It was strategy. Over the next few days, Harold became unusually kind. He cooked breakfast. He asked how I felt. He even held my hand again like he used to decades ago. But I could feel the calculation behind every gesture. He was building a story. A story of a caring husband and a fragile wife. Meanwhile, I was building something else. With Marissa's help, I started gathering evidence. Old bank records, messages, witnesses, people who had seen Harold's true face when no one else was watching. And then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Victor showed up at our house again. Harold was not home. I was alone in the living room when I heard the knock on the door. For a moment I considered not opening it. But curiosity and courage pushed me forward. I opened the door slowly. Victor stood there with a serious expression. He did not smile this time. He looked nervous. He asked if he could come in. I hesitated, then stepped aside. As he walked into the house, I felt a strange shift in the air. He did not sit down immediately. He stood near the doorway, looking around like he was afraid of being heard. Then he said something I never expected. He said, "Eleanor, I need to talk to you. Not as Harold's friend, but as someone who knows the truth about what Harold is planning." My heart began to pound. I asked him what he meant. Victor swallowed hard. He said, "Harold is not just trying to control your money. He is trying to destroy you completely." For a moment I could not speak. I stared at Victor, unsure whether to believe him. Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice. He said, "If you do not act fast, you may lose everything. Not just your house, not just your savings, but your identity, your reputation, and your freedom." The words echoed in my mind like thunder. And in that moment, I realized that the real danger had only just begun. Because if Victor was telling the truth, then Harold's plan was far darker than I ever imagined. And I was running out of time. Victor stood in my living room like a man carrying a heavy secret. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, breaking the silence. I watched his face carefully. This was not the confident Victor the First had known for years. His eyes were restless. His hands trembled slightly. I asked him why he came. He looked toward the window, then back at me. He said he could not stay silent anymore. He said Harold had gone too far. I folded my hands on my lap and told him to speak clearly. Victor took a deep breath. He said Harold had been planning everything for months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. He said Harold felt humiliated because he believed I was hiding money and secrets from him. He said Harold felt betrayed because he realized that the quiet woman he married was not as powerless as he thought. He said Harold wanted to regain control, not just as a husband, but as a master of the situation. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I did not interrupt him. Victor continued. He said Harold had been meeting with lawyers and advisors in secret. He said Harold wanted to make the court believe I was mentally unstable so he could control my assets legally. He said Harold also wanted to isolate me from anyone who could help me. Friends, lawyers, even neighbors. I asked him how he knew all this. Victor looked away. He said Harold talked too much when he was angry. He said Harold believed Victor was on his side. He said Harold believed I was already defeated. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. Defeated. For 50 years, I had carried Harold's pride on my back. Now he thought he could erase me with paperwork and lies. I asked Victor why he was telling me this. He hesitated. Then he said something that surprised me. He said guilt. He said he could not forget the night he walked into my bedroom. He said he realized too late that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He said he had allowed Harold's frustration to turn him into someone he did not recognize. I looked at him carefully. I had every reason to hate him. But at that moment, I saw fear in his eyes. Fear of consequences. Fear of himself. I asked him if he was willing to tell the truth if needed. Victor swallowed hard. He asked what I meant. I told him that one day, he might have to speak in court. He might have to admit what Harold tried to do to me. He might have to stand against his friend. Victor's face turned pale. He said Harold would destroy him if he did that. I looked at him quietly and said Harold is already destroying me. The room fell silent again. After a long moment, Victor nodded slowly. He said he would think about it. He said he could not promise anything yet. Understood. People rarely choose courage immediately. Sometimes it takes fear of losing everything to make them speak. When Victor left, I sat alone on the couch for a long time. His words echoed in my mind. Harold had been planning everything for months. That meant the betrayal was not a moment of madness. It was a strategy. That night I called Marissa again. I told her everything Victor had said. She listened quietly, then said something that made my heart beat faster. She said, "Eleanor, if Victor is telling the truth, then we have a strong case." She said Harold's actions could be seen as emotional abuse, manipulation, and attempted coercion. I did not fully understand all the legal words, but I understood one thing clearly. Harold was no longer just my husband. He was my opponent. Over the next few weeks, my life became a strange performance. At home, I played the role Harold wanted to see. The confused, tired old woman who depended on him. I asked him small questions about simple things. I pretended to forget dates and names. I allowed him to feel powerful. But behind the scenes, with Marissa's help, I was doing the opposite. I was organizing documents, recording conversations, contacting old friends who knew the truth about our marriage. And slowly, quietly, I was preparing for the day Harold would face the consequences of his own actions. One afternoon, Harold told me something that made my heart drop. He said the court had scheduled my mental evaluation. It would happen in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I nodded calmly, but inside I felt the pressure tightening. If the evaluation went wrong, Harold could gain legal control over my life. Could lose my house, my savings, my freedom. That night I could not sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the dark sky. For the first time in years I felt truly afraid. Not of Harold, but of the system that might believe his lies. I wondered if my age would make people doubt my voice. I wondered if society would believe an old woman over a respected man. As these thoughts filled my mind, my phone suddenly rang. The sound startled me. It was past midnight. Only one person would call me at that hour. Victor. I answered slowly. His voice was low and urgent. He said, "Eleanor, something happened tonight." I asked him what. There was a pause on the line. Then he said words that made my heart freeze. He said, "Harold found out that I came to talk to you." He said, "Harold is angry. Very angry." He said, "Harold believes you are working against him." He said, "Harold told me something dangerous." I held my breath and asked him what Harold said. Victor hesitated. Then he said, "Harold said if Eleanor does not cooperate, I will make sure she never speaks against me again." The words felt like a blade pressed against my chest. For a moment I could not speak. Victor continued quickly. He said, "Eleanor, you need to be careful." He said, "Harold is not joking anymore." I looked around my quiet house. The walls felt closer than before. For the first time I realized that this story was no longer just about betrayal and revenge. It was about survival. And I knew that the next chapter of my life would be the most dangerous one yet. Because when fear enters a man's heart, he becomes capable of things no one expects. And Harold had reached that point. After Victor's call, I did not sleep again. I sat on my bed until morning, listening to every sound in the house. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft breathing of Harold beside me. For the first time in my life, the man sleeping next to me felt like a stranger I could not trust. When the sun finally rose, I felt tired but strangely calm. Fear had already done its worst to me. Now it was time to think clearly. Harold woke up an hour later. He acted normal. He asked if I wanted breakfast. He smiled the way he used to smile when guests were around. But his eyes were different. There was something sharp in them. Something impatient. I realized then that Victor was right. Harold knew I was no longer under his control. And he did not like it. That afternoon, Harold told me he wanted to take me for a drive. He said fresh air would help me relax before the evaluation. For a moment, I felt a wave of unease. But I did not refuse. Refusing would make him suspicious. So I nodded and followed him to the car. We drove out of town, past the familiar streets, past the small shops and quiet houses. Soon the roads became emptier. Fields stretched on both sides of us. No neighbors. No traffic. Just silence and open land. Harold did not talk much. He kept his eyes on the road. After a while, I asked him where we were going. He said he just wanted to show me something. His voice was calm, but his hands were tight on the steering wheel. My heart began to beat faster. We turned onto a narrow dirt road. Dust rose behind the car like smoke. Finally, Harold stopped near an old abandoned barn. The place looked forgotten by time. The paint on the walls was peeling. The windows were broken. The wind moved through the tall grass like whispers. Harold turned off the engine. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then he turned to look at me. His expression was not gentle anymore. It was serious, almost cold. He said, "Eleanor, we need to talk honestly." I looked at him quietly and waited. He said he knew I had been visiting lawyers. He said he knew I had been speaking to people behind his back. He said he felt betrayed. Betrayed. The word felt heavy and ironic. I asked him how he found out. He did not answer directly. Instead, he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I built everything for this family. Carried you for 50 years. And now you want to destroy me." Carried me. As if I were a burden he had tolerated. I told him I was not trying to destroy him. I told him I was trying to protect myself. Harold laughed quietly. Not a happy laugh. A bitter one. He said, "Protect yourself from what?" "From your own husband." He leaned closer to me. He said, "Eleanor, you do not understand how the world works." He said, "If this goes to court, people will believe me, not you." He said, "I am respected. I am known. You are just an old woman who suddenly decided to rebel." His words hit me like stones. But I did not look away. I told him something he did not expect. I told him I was not afraid anymore. For a moment, Harold's face tightened. He did not like hearing that. He stepped out of the car and walked around to my side. My heart began to race again. He opened my door slowly. He held out his hand and asked me to step out of the car. The wind brushed against my face as I stood up. The abandoned barn loomed behind us like a silent witness. Harold walked a few steps away from the car and turned to face me. He said he wanted to make something clear. He said if I continued to fight him, he would make sure I regretted it. I asked him how. His eyes hardened. He said he could make people believe anything. He said he could make doctors, neighbors, even the court think I was unstable. He said he could take everything from me and leave me with nothing. For a moment, I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me. But then I remembered something important. He was threatening me because he was afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of losing his image. Afraid of the truth. I looked at him and spoke slowly. I told him that threats would not erase what he had done. I told him that trying to silence me would only expose him more. For a few seconds, Harold stared at me without speaking. Then something unexpected happened. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. He stepped aside and answered the call. I could not hear everything, but I heard enough. I heard Marissa's name. I heard the words legal notice and evidence. Harold's hand began to tremble slightly as he listened. When he ended the call, he looked at me differently. Not like a man in control, but like a man who realized he had underestimated his opponent. He walked back to me slowly. He asked me what I had done. I looked at him calmly and said I finally stopped being silent. For a long moment the wind blew between us. The abandoned barn creaked in the distance. And I knew something had shifted forever. Harold was no longer certain of victory. But I also knew that a wounded man is sometimes more dangerous than a confident one. As we drove back home, Harold did not speak again. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dark. That night I felt something strange. Not fear. Not hope. But anticipation. Because I knew the real battle was about to begin. And I had a feeling that Harold's next move would be his most desperate one yet. The morning of the court hearing arrived quietly. As if the world had no idea that my life was about to be judged by strangers. I woke up before Harold. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, brushing my silver hair slowly. For years, I had looked at this face and seen regret. That morning I saw something else. Resolve. I put on a simple navy blue dress and a pearl necklace that Harold once bought for me when we were still young and in love. As I fastened the clasp, I felt the weight of memories pressing against my chest. But I did not let them weaken me. Today was not about the past. It was about the truth. Harold drove us to the courthouse in silence. The sky was gray. The air felt heavy. Neither of us spoke. When we arrived, I saw Victor standing near the entrance. He looked nervous. When our eyes met, he looked away. I wondered if he would keep his promise. Inside the courtroom, everything felt cold and formal. People in dark suits moved around with serious faces. Marissa was already there, sitting beside a table filled with folders and documents. When she saw me, she stood up and smiled gently. Her presence gave me strength. Harold sat on the other side of the room. He looked confident. He nodded politely at people who greeted him. To everyone else, he looked like a worried husband trying to help his aging wife. Only I knew the truth behind his smile. When the judge entered, the room became quiet. The hearing began. Harold's lawyer spoke first. He described me as a fragile old woman who had become confused and suspicious in recent years. He said Harold was only trying to protect me from myself. As he spoke, I felt a familiar sting in my chest. For decades, I had been reduced to silence. Now, they were trying to turn my silence into proof of madness. Marissa stood up when it was her turn to speak. Her voice was calm but firm. She described my life differently. She spoke of my education, my financial planning, my years of supporting Harold's career. She presented documents that showed my independent investments and legal ownership of property. As she spoke, I saw Harold's expression change slightly. He had not expected this much evidence. Then came the moment that made my heart race. The judge asked if there were any witnesses. Marissa looked toward the back of the courtroom. For a second, no one moved. Then someone stood up slowly. Victor. The room turned to look at him. My breath caught in my throat. Victor walked forward with slow steps. He looked at Harold for a brief moment before taking the witness stand. When he raised his hand to swear an oath, his voice trembled slightly. The judge asked him his name and relationship to Harold. Victor answered clearly. He said he had been Harold's closest friend for more than 30 years. Then Marissa asked him the question I had been waiting for. She asked him why he came to testify. Victor took a deep breath. He looked straight ahead, not at Harold, not at me. He said he could no longer stay silent about what he had seen and heard. The courtroom became very quiet. Victor said Harold had talked openly about wanting control over my assets. He said Harold believed I was hiding money and secrets from him. He said Harold planned to make me look unstable so he could take over my finances. I felt my hands tremble slightly, but I kept them folded on my lap. Victor continued. He said Harold had also allowed him to cross a line in my bedroom that night. A line that should never have been crossed. A wave of shock moved through the courtroom. I saw Harold's face turn pale. People began to whisper quietly. The judge raised a hand for silence. Harold's lawyer stood up quickly, trying to object. But the judge allowed Victor to continue. Victor's voice grew steadier as he spoke. He said Harold did not stop him. He said Harold encouraged the situation. He said Harold believed it was justified because he wanted a child at any cost. I felt tears fill my eyes, but I did not let them fall. Not yet. When Victor finished speaking, the courtroom felt different. The story Harold had built began to crack. The image of the caring husband began to crumble. Harold looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Then the judge turned to me. He asked if I wanted to speak. For a moment I hesitated. My voice had been silent for so long that I almost forgot how powerful it could be. Slowly I stood up. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I looked at the judge. I looked at Harold. I looked at the people who had believed his story without knowing mine. Then I spoke. I said I was not a broken woman. I said I was not confused. I said I was tired of being treated like an object that could be controlled and traded. I told them about the years of quiet sacrifice. The years of shame I carried for something that was never my fault. The night Harold allowed his friend to walk into my bedroom like I had no dignity or voice. As I spoke, my voice did not shake. It grew stronger. I told them that age does not erase intelligence. That silence does not mean weakness. That love does not justify betrayal. When I finished, the courtroom was silent again. The judge looked thoughtful. He asked Harold if he wanted to respond. Harold stood up slowly. For the first time in my life, he looked unsure. He tried to speak, but his words came out disorganized. He denied some accusations. He tried to explain others. But his voice lacked confidence. The judge listened carefully. Then he announced that he would review all evidence before making a decision. The hearing ended. As people began to leave the courtroom, I remained seated for a moment. My legs felt weak, but my heart felt lighter. Outside, Harold walked past me without speaking. He did not look at me. Victor stood near the door again. When our eyes met this time, he nodded slightly. Not as Harold's friend, but as someone who had finally chosen the truth. As Marissa walked beside me out of the courthouse, she whispered something that made my heart beat faster. She said, "Eleanor, whatever happens next, Harold will not forget what happened today." She said men who lose control often try to regain it in dangerous ways. Her words stayed with me as I walked to my car. I looked at the sky above the courthouse. It was no longer gray. A thin line of sunlight was breaking through the clouds. For a moment I felt hope. But deep inside I also felt something else. A warning. Because I knew Harold was not finished yet. And the next time he acted, he would not do it in public. He would do it in silence. And that silence would be far more dangerous than any courtroom. The days after the hearing felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. Harold barely spoke to me anymore. He stopped pretending to be kind. He stopped pretending to be concerned. He moved through the house like a shadow, avoiding my eyes, avoiding conversation, avoiding everything that reminded him he had lost control in the courtroom. But I knew something important. Silence from a man like Harold was not peace. It was preparation. At night I slept lightly. Every sound made me open my eyes. Every creak of the floor felt like a warning. Marissa had advised me to stay with a friend for a while, but I refused. This was my home. I had spent half a century in these walls. I would not run from it now. One evening, Harold came home later than usual. His footsteps sounded heavier than normal. When he walked into the living room, he did not greet me. He poured himself a drink and stood near the window, staring outside. I sat on the couch with a book in my hands, pretending to read. After a long silence, he spoke. He said, "Eleanor, you embarrassed me in that courtroom." I closed my book slowly and looked at him. I told him I only told the truth. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. He said, "Truth is whatever people choose to believe." He turned toward me. His eyes were dark. He said, "People will forget what happened. But I will not." A chill ran through my body. I asked him what he meant. He did not answer. He finished his drink and walked toward the bedroom. That night, I dreamed of the abandoned barn again. I saw Harold standing there alone, calling my name in a voice that did not sound human anymore. I woke up with my heart racing. The house was silent. Harold was not beside me. I looked at the clock. It was past 2 in the morning. I sat up slowly, listening. I heard faint sounds coming from the kitchen. Metal against metal. A drawer opening. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. I got out of bed quietly and walked toward the hallway. The lights were off, but moonlight entered through the windows, enough to see shadows. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped. Harold was standing there. His back was turned to me. He was holding something in his hand. A small bottle. My heart began to pound violently. I recognized the bottle. It was medication. Not mine. It belonged to him. But it was not the kind you take for sleep. It was the kind doctors prescribe carefully, with strict warnings. I asked him softly what he was doing. He turned slowly. For a moment, I did not recognize his face. His expression was calm. "Come." He said he was worried about me. He said he could not sleep because he kept thinking about how fragile I had become. I felt my stomach twist. He walked toward me slowly. He said, "Eleanor, you need rest." He said stress is not good for your condition. Condition. The word felt poisonous. He held out the bottle toward me. He said the doctor prescribed something to help you relax. I knew he was lying. No doctor had given me anything. I stepped back slightly. I told him I did not need it. His smile tightened. He said, do not make things difficult. For a second, I saw the same man who stood in the hallway the night Victor entered my bedroom. A man who believed my body and my mind were objects he could control. My heart raced, but my mind stayed sharp. I told him I would take it later. He shook his head slowly. He said no. He said you should take it now. He moved closer. In that moment I realized something terrifying. Harold was not just trying to scare me anymore. He was trying to create proof. If something happened to me, people would believe I was unstable, confused, or careless. No one would question him. I felt a surge of fear, but I also felt something else. Anger. Not loud anger. Cold anger. I looked at Harold and spoke softly. I told him if he forced me to take anything, I would call the police. For a moment, his eyes flickered. He hesitated. He had not expected resistance. I took my phone from my pocket slowly and held it in my hand. He stared at it for a few seconds. Then he stepped back. He put the bottle down on the counter. He said, you are overreacting. He said I was only trying to help you. I did not respond. I watched him carefully as he walked back toward the bedroom. That night I did not sleep again. I sat on the couch until morning, holding my phone, listening to every sound. When the sun rose, I knew something with absolute clarity. If I stayed in that house without acting, Harold would eventually succeed in destroying me. He had crossed a line that could never be erased. That morning I called Marissa before Harold woke up. My voice was calm, but my words were urgent. I told her everything that happened in the kitchen. There was silence on the line. Then she said, Eleanor, you cannot stay there anymore. She said this is no longer just emotional abuse. She said this is dangerous. I looked around my house. The walls felt unfamiliar. The memories felt heavy. For the first time, I understood that survival sometimes requires leaving what you once loved. That afternoon I packed more than a small bag. I packed the wooden box. Packed my documents. I packed my dignity. When Harold came home and saw my suitcase near the door, his face changed. He asked me where I was going. I looked at him calmly and said I am leaving. For a moment he looked shocked. Then his expression hardened. He said you cannot just walk away. I looked at him and replied quietly. I am not walking away. I am walking toward my freedom. He stepped closer, his voice rising slightly. He said you think you won because of one court hearing. He said you think people will protect you. He said the world forgets old women very quickly. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I told him maybe the world forgets old women. But the law does not. And the truth does not. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. Harold did not stop me. He stood there, watching me like a man who had just lost something he never truly understood. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter. But I also felt something else. I felt that Harold was not done yet. And I knew the final battle between us would not happen in a kitchen, or a bedroom, or a courtroom. It would happen in a place where truth and consequences finally meet. And when that moment came, only one of us would walk away with dignity. When I walked out of that house with my suitcase, I did not look back. Not because I did not care, but because I had spent 50 years looking back, hoping Harold would change. That day I chose to look forward instead. Marissa arranged a small apartment for me in a quiet retirement community 2 towns away. It was not luxurious, but it was peaceful. The first night I slept there I cried quietly. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in decades, I slept without fear of footsteps in the hallway. Without fear of whispers behind my door. Without fear of being erased by the man who once promised to protect me. Meanwhile, Harold did not stay silent. He filed more papers. He tried to claim I abandoned him. He tried to convince people I was unstable. But this time he was not fighting a silent woman anymore. He was fighting evidence. Marissa moved quickly. She filed a counter case. She presented recordings, documents, witness statements, and financial records. Victor testified again. This time he did not hesitate. He told the court everything. How Harold planned to control my assets. How he encouraged him to cross a line in my bedroom. How he spoke about making me look mentally unfit. The judge listened carefully. So did the jury. And slowly, Harold's image began to collapse in front of everyone who once admired him. The final hearing lasted hours. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom was silent. He ruled that Harold's guardianship petition was malicious and deceptive. He ruled that my assets belonged to me alone. He ruled that Harold had abused his position as a husband to manipulate and intimidate me. He ordered legal restrictions that prevented Harold from controlling my finances or contacting me without permission. In that moment, I felt something I had never felt in my marriage. Justice. Harold stood there frozen, his face pale. For the first time in his life, he had lost everything he thought he owned. Not just money, not just reputation, but power. After the hearing, he tried to speak to me outside the courthouse. I looked at him calmly and listened. He said, "Eleanor, I never thought it would end like this." I looked at him and replied softly, "Neither did I. But it ended the way it should have." I turned away and walked toward Marissa. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had felt in decades. I did not feel hatred. I did not feel revenge. Felt freedom. Weeks later, I started a new life. I joined a local community group. I volunteered at a small library. I made friends who listened to me without judging me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I realized something important. I had not won because Harold lost. I had won because I finally chose myself. Because silence is not strength. And love should never require humiliation. If you stayed with Eleanor's story until the end, thank you for listening with your heart. If this story touched you, like this video so more people can hear stories like this. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional and powerful stories. Turn on the notification button so you never miss the next story. And tell me in the comments which part of the country you are watching from. I want to know who is listening and standing with Eleanor. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not revenge. It is the courage to walk away and rebuild your life. And if you ever feel small, silenced, or underestimated, remember this. Even the quietest voice can shake the world when it finally decides to speak.